Welcome back. I've been reading more Unrivaled, Book 4, and here's a good enough summary on the second half. Chapter 5, Cowrie and Lexia. Cowrie had only learned about the other world not long ago, but ever since then, it had quietly woven itself into her routine. What started as curiosity quickly turned into a habit, and now she found herself coming up with more and more excuses to visit Yuya. She told herself it was for practical reasons, of course. The cabin's air was clean and refreshing, a stark contrast to the heavy, almost smoky feeling of the air back in Japan. It made studying easier, more comfortable, or at least that's what she'd like to believe. In reality, it wasn't just the air that kept drawing her back. Every time she visited, Yuya would cook dinner using ingredients straight from the garden in that other world. The meals were simple, but something about them was different. Richer and more nourishing in ways she couldn't explain. And somehow, despite never fighting a single monster, and still technically being level 1, Cowrie could feel the effects. Her stats had been steadily increasing. Little by little, without her even realizing it at first, her body had begun to change. Stronger, healthier, sharper. At this point, it was hard to deny it anymore. The food alone was turning her into something close to superhuman. So far, Cowrie's visits have been limited to the cabin and the small, peaceful area around it. As comfortable as it was, her curiosity started to grow. One day, unable to hold back any longer, she turned to Yuya and asked what the rest of the world was like, if he could show it to her. But for a moment, he hesitated. It wasn't that he didn't want to. If anything, he did. The idea of walking through the world with her, showing her the sights, felt right. But the thought was quickly overshadowed by everything he knew that lurked beyond the safety of the cabin. Monsters, assassins, the constant danger he had already been forced to face. That world wasn't kind, not to someone like Cowrie, who had never fought before. Yuya's expression softened as he looked at her, a quiet resolve settling in his chest. He couldn't take her there, not yet. But instead of refusing outright, he made her a promise. When he got stronger, when he was sure that he could protect her no matter what, he would take her to see it. For now, they settled on something simple. The two of them stepped out into the garden, walking side by side through rows of oversized vegetables. As they walked, Cowrie smiled softly and thanked Yuya for his cooking. Every meal he made had been incredible, and she meant it. Yuya rubbed the back of his head, a little embarrassed, explaining that everything he cooked came from this garden, from vegetables that only existed in this world. And those same ingredients were the reason she became so strong. Cowrie let out a small, amused laugh at that, though there was some truth behind it that she couldn't ignore. Lately, she's been having trouble hiding it, lifting things that should have been heavy without thinking, breezing through PE like it was nothing. It was getting harder and harder to act normal. Still, part of her found it funny. It felt like she stepped into the role of some overpowered character straight out of one of her mangas. As they continued walking, Yuya casually pointed out one of the plants growing nearby. The herb of complete healing. He explained that it was used to make the highest grade potions, the kind that can heal almost anything. Then, almost just as casually, he mentioned the battles he fought, the times he had come close to death. The times he hadn't made out whole. He spoke of it plainly, losing limbs, surviving only because of those very potions. If not for them, he wouldn't even be here. Cowrie stopped in her tracks. A chill ran through her as she looked at him, her expression tightening with fear. It wasn't just what he said, it was how easily he said it, as if it were something ordinary, and that's when Yuya realized it. Somewhere along the way, his sense of normal had shifted. What once would have horrified him had become something he could talk about without hesitation. Cowrie stood there silently, trying to process everything at once. The sheer potency of the herbs, the unnatural strength the food had given her, the existence of magic powerful enough to restore the body completely. And more than anything, what would happen if things like this ever made their way into the modern world? The thought alone was enough to unsettle her. Yuya, watching her reaction, was reminded of something Lexia once told him. Her warning about the dangers of his teleportation magic, about how easily something like that could spiral out of control in the wrong hands. He had already known that items and abilities left behind by the sage were rare, dangerous. But seeing Kaori's concern lay out so clearly in front of him, it finally sank in on a deeper level. Letting out a quiet breath, Yuya made a decision. From here on out, he would be more careful. Just as their conversation began to take on a heavier tone, a sudden yell echoed from somewhere in the distance. Yuya and Kaori both turned to look towards the sound, and what they saw coming was anything but expected. Princess Lexia, Luna, and Owen, and a group of knights, were sprinting straight in their direction, with a pack of goblins chasing close behind. "Help!" Owen and Luna shouted as they ran. Yuya let out a small sigh, the timing almost unbelievable, before giving Kaori a quick apology. Then, without hesitation, he moved. In one smooth motion, he vaulted over the garden fence and stepped directly into the path of the oncoming goblins. The first one barely had time to react before Yuya's foot struck it clearly, sending it flying. He didn't stop there. Keeping his training in mind, Yuya flowed through the group with controlled precision, his movements sharp and efficient. One kick after another, each strike landed exactly where it needed to, dropping the goblins one by one. There was no wasted motion, just the refined techniques his master had drilled into him. By the time the dust settled, the threat was already gone. Yuya turned back towards the group, brushing things off like it was nothing, and asked the obvious question. What were they doing all the way out here? Lexia, of course, answered without hesitation. She had come to see him. Luna quietly added that she was only there for her role as a bodyguard, her tone composed, but a faint shift in her expression gave away just enough to suggest that she wanted to see him too. Yuya was about to check up on Owen and the knights, and suddenly Lexia hopped the garden fence herself, and without a hint of hesitation she walked up straight to Kaori. "I am Lexia von Arcelia," she declared boldly. Caught off guard, Kaori quickly straightened and introduced herself in return, giving a polite, proper bow, the way she would back in Japan. Lexia's eyes lit up in recognition, clearly noticing the gesture of respect from Yuya's homeland. Then, almost at the exact same time, both girls turned to him. "Who is this woman to you, Yuya?" they both asked in perfect sync. Yuya panics and quickly ushers everyone inside the cabin, hoping that a change of setting will calm things down. It doesn't. As they step in, the girls give him a sharp, questioning looks, clearly expecting an explanation. Trying to keep things from spiraling, he introduces Kaori as a friend. The word hangs in the air for a moment. Kaori looks slightly disappointed, while Lexia and Luna seem quietly relieved by the clarification. Lowering his voice, Yuya leans towards Kaori and explains he hasn't told them about modern Japan yet, and he asks her to keep that detail to herself for now. There's no time to dwell on it, though, as he moves on to proper introductions. He presents Lexia as the princess, along with her bodyguards, Owen and Luna. The moment that registers, Kaori stiffens, suddenly worried she may have been too casual earlier without realizing who she was speaking to. At the same time, Yuya reflects on how unusual it feels to see somebody his age with bodyguards, but the thought doesn't linger long. Kaori herself is well known back in Japan, and she might have a similar protection. The realization helps ground him a bit. Lexia, unfazed by the tension, quickly pushes for a more relaxed atmosphere. She insists that formalities aren't necessary and asks Kaori to simply call her by her first name. Kaori, a little overwhelmed, tries to adjust to the sudden shift in tone. Without hesitation, Lexia begins explaining how she met Yuya, recounting the assassination attempt and Luna's role in it. Then, as if that weren't enough, Lexia casually mentions that she proposed to Yuya the second time they met. By that point, Kaori had been clearly overwhelmed, doing her best to process everything. "Bath?" Lexia's voice rang out the moment things settled, her demand loud and completely unfiltered. Beside her, Luna let out a quieter sigh, brushing at her clothes with a faint grimace. She admitted that the journey had left them sweaty, sticky, and thoroughly exhausted. A bath sounded more like a necessity than a luxury. Then, with a playful glint in her eye, Lexia turned to Yuya and casually invited him to join them. Kaori's face instantly flushed bright pink. Yuya, on the other hand, felt his blood pressure spiking as he hurriedly shook his head and declined. Luna pinched the bridge of her nose, used to this kind of behavior, and muttered under her breath that Lexia was brainless. Yuya didn't say anything, but internally he completely agreed. Still, trying to regain her composure, Kaori realized something odd. She hadn't seen any kind of bath in the cabin. As she voiced the question, Luna casually explained that it wasn't something fixed in place. It was a magical item Yuya carried with him at all times. At that time, Yuya reached into his inventory and produced it without much ceremony. Kaori blinked in surprise. She heard him mention items dropping from monsters, like something straight out of a game, but this was her first time actually seeing one in use. Watching it appear so naturally still felt unreal. Before long, the three girls slipped into the bath together. A collective sigh of relief escaped them as the warmth magical water washed away the fatigue of their journey. The tension melting from their bodies almost instantly. Kaori sank slightly into the water, still not quite used to how often Yuya managed to surprise her. Just when she thought she understood his world a little better, something like this would happen. And then, without warning, Lexia turned to her. "So," she asked bluntly, "do you love Yuya?" Kaori froze. Lexia, tilting her head as if it was the most natural question in the world, and added that she wanted to know if Kaori felt the same way they did. Caught off guard, Kaori's thoughts began to race. Memories surfaced one after another. Moments she'd spent with Yuya. The kindness he'd shown her. The way he'd made her feel safe even without trying. Somewhere along the way, those feelings had changed. She took a small breath. Yes, she admitted honestly. At some point, without her even realizing, her feelings had turned to love. That was all it took. Almost immediately, the atmosphere shifted as the girls began comparing their experiences with Yuya. Each story shared with a strange sense of pride, like it had quietly become a competition. Kaori tried to keep up, but soon found herself confused when the topic of first wife came up. Lexi explained it matter-of-factly. In this kingdom, polygamy wasn't unusual, especially for royalty and nobility. Marriages were expected, heirs were important, and taking multiple wives was simply part of that world. And as far as Lexia and Luna were concerned, they fully intended to become Yuya's wives. Which, apparently, meant Kaori had just been added to the discussion as well. She blinked, processing that, yet surprised. She wasn't as embarrassed as she thought she'd be. If anything, she found herself accepting it more easily than expected. As the conversation drifted on, the tension faded, replaced by laughter and shared stories. Before long, what started as an awkward, unexpected situation had turned into something else entirely. Somehow, the three of them had become friends. For the time being, Owen had two responsibilities: protect Princess Lexia and quietly observe Yuya. The king's stance on the young man had been complicated from the start. At first, he had taken an immediate dislike to Yuya, largely because of Lexia's obvious affection towards him. It was enough to make any father wary, but things had shifted. After Yuya had saved the prince's life, he had earned a degree of favor, not complete trust, but enough to be taken seriously. And from what Owen had seen, the caution was justified. Yuya possessed undeniable strength. Not just that, he had access to rare items, the kind that weren't easily found even among nobility. Taken together, it made one thing clear. Building a relationship with him and whatever land he came from would be the smart move politically. Even so, the king wasn't desperate enough to trade his daughter's future for it, which made the current situation complicated. Owen's gaze shifted slightly towards Kaori. At a glance, it was obvious she came from the same place as Yuya. There was a familiarity in her appearance, her mannerisms, but beyond that, they didn't resemble each other closely enough to be family. So Owen ruled that out. But another possibility remained. They could be lovers. And if that were true, then any chance of securing a strong bond with Yuya, especially through Lexia, might already be slipping away. Owen narrowed his eyes slightly, turning the thought over in his mind. Then his attention drifted elsewhere, to Night. There was no mistaking it. Whatever creature that wasn't an ordinary dog. If Yuya had encountered it in the Weld, then it had to be a monster. But something didn't add up. There were no known dark-furred wolves capable of surviving in that region, and a cold realization crept into his thoughts. What if it's a black Fenrir, a legendary beast, one said to have destroyed the past 3 kingdoms? Owen felt a chill run down his spine as he stared at Knight, a hint of unease creeping into his expression. Knight noticed. He looked back at Owen, then slowly tilted his head, then tilted it a little more, and a little more, until he completely lost balance and toppled over onto the ground. Owen blinked. No, he muttered, shaking his head. That was impossible. A creature like that wouldn't behave so... Still, his thoughts weren't entirely at ease as he turned his attention to Akatsuki. The pig's coat was unusual, distinct enough to stand out, but unlike Knight or Yuya, he hadn't shown any real signs of combat abilities. As if to confirm it, Akatsuki suddenly rolled onto his back, wiggling happily with his belly exposed, completely carefree. Owen stared for a moment, and then let out a quiet breath and shook his head again. In the end, despite all of his observations and careful analysis, he couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't learned nearly as much as he should have. Not long after, the girls stepped out of the bath, looking completely refreshed, their earlier exhaustion washed away. The mood had lifted, light and relaxed again, as if the chaos from earlier never happened. Yuya, however, still couldn't quite wrap his head around why they had come all this way in the first place. As expected, Lexia answered without hesitation. She simply wanted to see him. That was reason enough in her mind. Luna immediately shot her down, her tone sharp as she reminded Lexia just how reckless that was. Every trip into the Weld puts them in real danger. This wasn't some casual outing. Owen, looking more worn down than ever, didn't hold back either. He joined in, adding his own lecture, clearly at the end of his patience with the princess's impulsiveness. Before things could settle, Yuya added something else, something that shifted the mood again. He and Kaori would be leaving tomorrow. Midterms were coming up, though of course he couldn't exactly explain that part. Still, the announcement alone was enough. Lexia froze for a moment, before quickly trying to recover, forcing a bright smile as she declared that she'd just come visit again. Owen shut that idea down instantly. In a calm, almost cold tone, he informed her that he had already arranged additional duties for her, on top of the ones she'd been conveniently neglecting. There was a beat of silence, and then Lexia let out a dramatic scream and collapsed onto the ground, flailing in full protest like a child denied something she wanted. Yuya could only watch, unsure how to react. Still pouting, Lexia suddenly perked up when Yuya offered to escort them to the edge of the Weld, and just like that, a mischievous idea crossed her mind. With a smug smile, she declined, declaring that Luna and Owen can use the extra training along the way. The two of them froze. They slowly turned, staring daggers at the princess. Lexia, of course, pretended not to notice, and once they finally set off, Yuya quietly sent Knight ahead, having him keep watch over them from the shadows just in case. With that handled, he turned back to Kaori, curiosity slipping through as he tried to casually ask what the girls had talked about in the bath. Kaori simply smiled. "It's a secret," she said, and no matter how he looked at her, she didn't give him anything more. Chapter 6. Reunion with the Mysterious Girl. A few days slipped by, and before long Yuya found himself hitting his limit. Studying for midterms had completely taken over his time, and his mind was starting to feel dull from it. Deciding he needed a break, he figured a simple walk would help him clear his head, maybe take Knight and Akatsuki along with him. Just as he was about to head out, Knight suddenly dashed off to another room. A moment later, he came trotting back, proudly carrying something in his mouth. Yuya blinked. It's his guild card. He took it from Knight, raising an eyebrow, as the implication sank in. Was this Knight's way of suggesting they take a job? A small smile tugged at Yuya's lips. Liking the suggestion, he quickly got ready. Once everything was set, the three of them teleported to a spot just outside the royal capital, careful to avoid drawing any unwanted attention. After entering the city, though, they ran into somebody familiar, Luna. She looked genuinely surprised to see them, but that surprise quickly melted into a soft smile as she crouched down to greet Knight and Akatsuki, gently petting them both. She explained that Lexia was currently buried under a mountain of paperwork, and with Owen handling security for the day, she had been given some rare time off. Yuya listened, then casually invited her to join them on the job. For a split second, Luna froze. Her mood shifted almost instantly, a quiet giddiness slipping through as she seemed to interpret the invitation as something closer to a date. Yuya, completely unaware, simply nodded. Unfortunately, when they arrived at the guild, reality set in. Given their current rank, most of the available quests were fairly simple, nothing particularly challenging. After looking through the options, they eventually settled on a routine monster patrol just outside the city limits. At the counter, Emilia handed them the paperwork efficiently, sending them off without much delay. With everything in order, the group made their way to a quiet alley tucked away from prying eyes, making sure nobody was watching. Yuya prepared to teleport them out of the city once more. The moment they stepped outside the city, Luna's mood shifted. Her smile stretched from ear to ear, and a soft, cheerful hum slipped out as she walked beside Yuya. It had been a while since they had time alone like this. Yuya slowly became aware of it too, and just as quickly his face flushed pink. The realization settled in awkwardly, making the air between them feel a little more charged than before. Before either of them can say much about it, they reach the edge of the forest. Yuya glanced ahead, noticing how different it felt compared to the Weld. It lacked that overwhelming, suffocating danger. This place, while still wild, felt manageable. Then suddenly a scream cut through the air. Knight reacted instantly. His ears perked up, and without hesitation he took off towards the sound, disappearing into the trees. Yuya already moving after him, Luna close behind. They didn't have to go far. Just ahead they found a woman collapsed on the ground, Glenna the witch, clearly injured. Yuya rushed forward, reaching out to help her, but before he could, something struck him from the side. An unseen force. "Watch out," Luna shouted. "Assassin chameleons." Her voice sharpened as she explained, B-class monsters, and ones that shouldn't be anywhere near the capital. Invisible enemies. Without hesitation, Luna lashed out, her threads whipping wildly through the air in every direction. Most of her strikes cut through empty space, but a few landed, and that was enough. The moment they were hit, faint outlines flickered into view as the chameleon's camouflage faltered. Yuya didn't waste a second. With a single clean motion, he swung his Omnisword, cutting one straight in half. The remaining monsters froze for just a moment, then immediately scattered. Luna, exhausted, lowering her threads slightly as she confirmed it. Typical behavior. Assassin chameleons were ambush predators, cowardly ones. The moment the situation turned against them, they ran. With the danger gone, Glenna pushed herself up, brushing off the last of her fears as she activated a few charms to steady herself. Then she turned to Yuya, her expression softening with relief. "Thank you for saving me," she said, her voice warm as she invited him back to her home as a reward. But before he could respond, Luna stepped in. "And what about my reward?" she asked, her tone just sharp enough to carry a hint of challenge. Glenna froze. Slowly she looked at Luna, and whatever she saw made her visibly more nervous than the monsters had. "Don't swing that way," she blurted, before turning and practically sprinting off towards her home. Yuya blinked, caught off guard, and then glanced at Luna, a bit concerned by the shift in her mood. "Are you okay?" Luna waved it off almost immediately, brushing aside the question like it didn't matter. "It's nothing." But even as she said it, something about her just felt slightly off. Still, with the patrol unfinished, they continued deeper into the forest. As they walked, Yuya couldn't help but keep trying, again and again, to figure out what was really bothering her. A few more days went by before Yuya finally remembered something he completely overlooked: the drops from the assassin chameleons. Curiously, he checked the items he had left behind and immediately realized they weren't ordinary loot. One of them was the Cloak of Concealment. Just by equipping it, it granted complete invisibility. Yuya blinked, taking that in. No wonder those monsters had been so difficult to deal with. The second item caught his attention just as quickly. An equipment-changing bangle. Unlike anything he used before, it allowed him to register different sets of gear and switch between them instantly. For a moment he just stared at it, and then quickly decided how to use it. He registered both his armor and his regular clothes to the bangle and tested it out. In an instant, his outfit changed, and then back again. Seamless. A small wave of relief washed over him. Up until now, putting on his equipment had always taken time and effort, something he had to consciously prepare for. But with this, he could switch whenever he needed to. Back at school, midterms finally came to an end. After all the time Yuya had poured into studying, he felt surprisingly confident about how he'd done. For once, he wasn't second-guessing himself. Unlike Kaede and Akira, the two of them sat there looking completely drained, practically sweating through their uniforms as they stared ahead in silence. It didn't take much to guess on how their exams had gone. Watching them, Yuya let out a quiet breath, and in the same moment his thoughts drifted elsewhere, to Kaori. He found himself silently thanking her. If it weren't for all the time she spent helping him study, he probably wouldn't be feeling this way right now. Lately, she had been on his mind a lot. Now that the exams were over, there wasn't really a reason for her to keep coming by the cabin. The routine they'd fallen into suddenly stopped, leaving a noticeable gap behind. And yet, even after discovering everything, about the other world, about him, she still had accepted him without hesitation. The thought lingered. Yuya frowned slightly at the new realization beginning to take shape. Did he have feelings for her? The question alone made his chest tighten. Almost immediately, his old insecurities crept in, heavy and familiar. No matter how much he'd changed, that part of him hadn't disappeared so easily. Kaori could find someone better. Someone more normal, more worthy. The thoughts spiraled quickly, dragging his mood down with them. Yuya clenched his fists lightly, frustrated with himself for slipping back into that mindset. I need to train, he muttered under his breath. It was the one thing that always helped. If he moved his body, pushed himself hard enough, he could quiet those thoughts, even if only for a little while. Back at the cabin, Yuya stood in the quiet, his thoughts circling back to one thing, training. Before long, those thoughts pulled up memories of Master Rabbit and the mysterious girl, both overwhelmingly strong in their own ways. Just remembering them lit a spark of motivation in his chest. If he wanted to keep up, he needed to grow stronger. Yuya exhaled slowly, thinking it through. He had both magic and martial arts, but up until now he had been treating them as separate things. But what if he combined them? He tried a few ideas first, experimenting clumsily, but nothing quite worked. The results were inconsistent at best, and completely ineffective at worst. Maybe I'm overthinking it, he muttered. Then a simple idea came to him. The sage's weapons were already incredibly powerful on their own. So what if he just enhanced them? Elemental magic, fire, lightning. Yuya closed his eyes and held out the absolute spear in front of him, steadying his breath. Lightning infusion. The moment the thought solidified, a bolt of electricity came crashing down from the sky, striking the spear directly. Yuya's eyes snapped open. He, Knight, and Akatsuki all stared in stunned silence. That worked? He whispered. On the first try? Still half in disbelief, Yuya stepped outside the garden and hurled the spear towards a nearby tree. It tore through the air with a sharp crackling sound, like a literal bolt of lightning given form. The moment it struck, it pierced straight through the trunk as if it were nothing. No resistance, no delay. The wood was instantly carbonized, blackened in a flash before it even had a chance to burn. And just as quickly, the spear flew back into Yuya's hands. He had stared at it, his pulse quickening. Eager to push forward, he began testing other elements. Fire worked. Wind worked. Lightning obviously worked. But when he tried water and earth, the results were far less impressive. Still, that didn't stop him. Instead, it gave him another idea. What if I use more than one? Yuya tightening his grip and focused again. This time 3 elements at once, and the spear reacted. It began to glow with an overwhelming energy, trembling violently in his hand as lightning crackled across its surface, while flames spiraled around it, whipped into motion by the swirling wind. The sheer pressure of the air shifted. Knight and Akatsuki slowly took a few cautious steps back. Yuya swallowed. Yeah, I probably shouldn't throw this. Behind him, Knight and Akatsuki nodded very empathetically. Taking the hint, Yuya carefully dispelled the energy, the spear calming down as the glow faded, the tension erased. Then, unexpectedly, Knight stepped forward. Curious, Yuya watched as Knight tried the same thing for himself. For a brief moment, nothing. Then a bolt of lightning struck down onto Knight. Yuya flinched, but Knight stood firm, completely unfazed as electricity danced along his body, gathering at his claws as they began to glow. In the next instant, Knight vanished from sight, moving with blinding speed as he leapt forward and slashed at a different tree. And the result was immediate. The surface blackened and charred, just like before. Yuya blinked. So it's not just weapons. If Knight can do it, then so could he. Determined, Yuya focused inward, adjusting the flow of magic, guiding it through his body instead of a weapon. Carefully, slowly, and then lightning spread across his skin. It didn't hurt. Instead, it felt controlled, like energy flowing exactly where it was supposed to. His armor began to glow faintly, a pale white light tracing along its surface. Did it work? He wondered out loud. There was only one way to find out. Yuya took a simple step forward, and the world vanished. His surroundings blurred past him in an instant, far too fast to process. Startled, he immediately pulled up his map, and his eyes widened. He was standing at the edge of the Weld. In one step, he had crossed several miles. His heart raced. He quickly turned around and stepped back. And just like that, he was standing in front of the cabin again. Yuya froze for a second and let out a breath of relief. Good. I didn't crash into the house. Beside him, Knight looked just as energized as he felt, the two of them exchanging a glance. No words were needed. With this new power, they had every reason to keep training. Just as they were about to move to a safer spot to continue training, something shifted. Knight noticed it first. His body tensed, and then in the next instant, Yuya reacted, grabbing both him and Akatsuki and dodging sharply to the side. An attack tore through the space where they had just been. Yuya turned and saw her, the strange girl from before. This time she held a silver bow in her hands, and without a word, arrows began to fall from the sky. Yuya raised his spear, deflecting them one after another, the impacts ringing out in quick succession. Just like last time, he called out to her, trying to understand. Why are you attacking me? Her answer was simple. Revenge. That was all. Yuya didn't hesitate after that. He moved first, hurling the spear straight at her. At the same time, he quickly covered Akatsuki with the cloak of concealment, keeping him out of harm's way. The girl dodged the spear effortlessly, but it didn't stop. Mid-air, it corrected its trajectory, its unique ability activating, as it curved back towards her. At the same time, Yuya and Knight rushed from both sides. 3 attacks at once, and she blocked all of them, easily. Then she countered. Arrows flew again, simple wooden ones, yet when Yuya blocked them, the force behind them still drove him back. There were too many to handle at once, and with no better options, Yuya made a decision. He activated his new technique mid-fight. Lightning infusion surged through his body stronger than before. The world shifted. His senses sharpened. Time itself seemed to slow as every movement around him became cleaner. Arrows that once felt overwhelming now looked predictable. He dodged them all. The girl's eyes widened slightly, caught off guard by his sudden burst of speed. Beside him, Knight moved in sync. No words needed. A bolt of lightning struck down onto Knight, empowering him just the same, and together they charged. The girl leapt into the air, and they followed instantly. Yuya's kick sent her even higher, launching her skyward, only for Knight to intercept her mid-air, slamming her back down into the ground with crushing force. The impact leaving a crater. But even then, she blocked. She rose again, clearly injured, her expression tightening as she recognized the danger they possessed. She drew her bow again, and this time she chanted. A golden arrow formed. She released it, but it moved strangely slow. For a split second, then she fired a second arrow. It struck the golden one from behind, accelerating it violently forward. Yuya and Knight barely dodged, only because they had seen its initial path. From there, the fight turned. They were pushed back again, forced on the defensive. Their speed kept them alive, but each near miss chipped away at them. They couldn't keep this up, and without time to heal, at this rate, they would be worn down and cut apart piece by piece. Before that could happen, the girl snapped. Frustration overtook her. She drew her bow again, harder this time. The weapon creaked and cracked under the strain that she poured into it. Comet. Then she released the arrow. It tore through the forest like a force of nature, ripping apart everything in its path. Yuya felt it immediately, that overwhelming presence. For the first time since the fight began, hope left him. There was no way to dodge it, no way to survive. And then, a blur. The arrow was kicked away, and Yuya's eyes widened. Master Rabbit stood there, as if it were nothing. "Made it just in time," he said, sounding almost relieved. "That's twice now." Then his gaze shifted to the girl, Yuti. The moment he said her name, her composure broke. Shock flickered across her face. "How do you—" "I looked into it," he cut in calmly. He explained it plainly. Yuti was the apprentice of the deity of arrows, and recently her master had died, betrayed by the very human village he had protected, used, sold out, killed. And now she sought revenge on humanity. The moment the truth settled in, Yuti's rage exploded. She unleashed her powers without restraint, firing attack after attack. Master Rabbit stepped forward, intercepting most of them, but even then, closing the distance wasn't easy. Still, he moved faster than all of them, even now. He glanced briefly at Yuya and Knight, and a hint of approval in his eyes. "You've gotten faster." "Change of plans. You block, I attack." "What?" Yuya protested. Master Rabbit didn't even look back. "Just kick them away." Like it was the simplest thing in the world. Yuya's mind raced, recalling everything, every lesson, every movement, every technique he had learned. Fear gripped him, but he moved anyway. With a shout, he threw his entire body into a kick and shattered the massive arrow. At the same time, Master Rabbit closed the gap. One kick. That was all it took. Yuti's defenses collapsed instantly. Her body sent flying through multiple trees, and yet she was still alive. Yuya froze for a moment, unsettled by the feeling in the air. "What is this?" Master Rabbit answered without hesitation. "The power of a demon." He told Yuya to remember that feeling. The demons fed on negative energy. They lied, manipulated, and killed to create more of it. The deity of arrows and the villagers were its most recent victims. Yuti heard everything and snapped. A scream tore from her throat as black mist poured from her body, her gray eyes burning red. And then she moved. Faster, stronger. She struck both Yuya and Master Rabbit, forcing him to fight even her seriously. They clashed on equal footing. Yuya hit the ground hard, bones breaking from the impact. He quickly drank a potion, healing himself as he watched in stunned silence for a brief moment. And then Akatsuki stepped forward, the cloak slipping away. Yuya and Knight both reacted immediately, trying to stop him. But it was too late. Akatsuki cast his spell, Holy Sanctuary. A massive wave of light spread across the area, warm, overwhelming. Master Rabbit felt his wounds heal instantly, and at the same time the black mist surrounding Yuti began to fade. Her strength dropped, her body wavered. Exhaustion hitting her all at once, and in that opening, Master Rabbit struck. His kick launched her high into the air before she crashed back down, finally losing consciousness for good. Silence fell. Master Rabbit, exhausted, then spoke again, more calmly now. Deities exist to fight demons, to protect the world, but the world itself also created beings to defend it. At that, everyone's gazes shifted towards Akatsuki and Knight, creatures like them. Almost nothing is known about them, even Master Rabbit admitted. "I don't know what you are." But Yuya answered without much thought. "A Menghuai and a Black Fenrir." Master Rabbit froze, completely. For once he had nothing to say. And then just as suddenly he turned away. "I'm tired," he muttered. "I'm going to rest." Yuya blinked, snapping back to reality. Wait, what about her? Master Rabbit glared at him, and then at Yudi, and then back again. A small, almost teasing smirk crossed his face. "You're better with girls." And with that, he launched himself into the sky and disappeared. Yuya stood there, stunned. Left with no real plan, he let out a quiet breath and then walked over carefully, lifting Yudi from the ground. For now, the only thing he can do was to take her back to the cabin. Epilogue. Far from everything, beyond civilization, beyond even the reach of life itself, there existed a place known only as the Wasteland, the world's landfill. Nothing grew there, no warmth, no movement, just a suffocating emptiness that stretched endlessly in every direction. And yet, from within that stillness, something stirred. A black mist seeped into the air, thick and unnatural, gathering slowly until it began to take shape. 3 shadows emerged from it, distorted, shifting forms that barely resembled anything human. Demons. Their voices echoed faintly as they spoke, discussing their plans as if the destruction of the world were nothing more than a distant goal to be managed. The girl they had granted powers to had fallen. It was an inconvenience, but not an unexpected one. Long ago, many of their kind had been wiped out by a single, overwhelmingly powerful human. Since then, they had learned. Brute force wasn't enough. Now, they work in the shadows, quietly, carefully. Other demons had already began their roles, whispering to humans and even deities alike, offering power, feeding on resentment, planting seeds of revenge. Slowly, they were turning the world's protectors against itself. That is how this would be won. Not through open war, but from within. Of the 3 present, 2 seemed entirely unconcerned by the girl's defeat. To them, it wasn't worth dwelling on. With little more than a dismissive remark, they disappeared, their forms unraveling as they left, speaking nothing more than of rest. The 3rd remained, watching, thinking. Unlike the others, this one wasn't so quick to brush it aside. After a moment, it too began to dissolve into the surrounding mist, but not before deciding on its next move. It would retrieve the girl's body, just in case, and then they were gone. The black mist faded, the shadows vanished, and the wasteland returned to silence once more. 2 days had passed since the battle with Yudi, and she still hasn't woken up. Yuya had been checking up on her regularly, trying every so often to rouse her, but each time there had been no response. In the meantime, he had taken precautions, hiding her silver bow away in the Japanese side of the house, far out of her reach, just in case. When he tried again that day, it worked. Yudi's eyes snapped open. In an instant she shot upright, her body moving with a sharp, immediate alertness, nothing like someone who had just regained consciousness. Panic flashed across her face as she looked around, trying to make sense of where she was. Then her gaze locked onto Yuya. Without hesitation, she reached for her bow and froze. It wasn't there. A flicker of frustration crossed her expression, but she didn't stop. Instead, she summoned an arrow directly into her hand, raising it above her head and lunging forward to strike. Wait! Yuya moved quickly, catching her wrist and trying to restrain her without hurting her. Compared to before, her strength was noticeably weaker. Without the demon's power, she couldn't overpower him. Still, she struggled, relentlessly. Not bad, a voice cut from the doorway. Yuya glanced over to see Master Rabbit casually leaning there, watching the whole thing unfold like it was entertainment. Think of this as part of your training, he added with a grin. This isn't training, Yuya shot back, still trying to hold Yudi still. Unbothered, Master Rabbit began speaking as if he were delivering a lecture. He had explained he looked deeper into what had been happening recently, into the truth behind Yudi's situation. It had all been orchestrated. Demons had deceived the humans, manipulating them into revealing the location of the deity of arrows. When they found him, they gave him a choice. His life or the life of the villagers he had sworn to protect. There had never been any real choice. He surrendered himself. And just as predictably, the demons killed the villagers anyway. Because that was their nature. They didn't bargain. They didn't keep promises. Everything they said was nothing more than a tool, a means to create more suffering and more despair. That is what they fed on. And as Master Rabbit spoke, Yudi's resistance began to weaken. Little by little, her strength faded. Not physically, but emotionally. Her grip loosened, her movements slowing as the weight of those words sank in. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling for the first time. Why did somebody like him have to die? There was no answer to give her. Yuya slowly released her, and together, he and Master Rabbit stepped outside, leaving her alone in the cabin to process everything. Out in the garden, the air felt heavier. Master Rabbit's expression shifted, the earlier humor gone. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Yuya looking at him. "Whoever set this in motion won't just leave things like this. They'll come to check on her." The implications settled in. Yuya glanced back towards the cabin. Without realizing it, he stepped into something far bigger than himself. A conflict between demons and deities. And now, he was a part of it. Alright. My notes for the second half are really extensive. And there's not a lot that I left out. I think I'm going to chop down my notes more often. Or just more in general. So there's not a lot of flavor that I left out with my notes. The only three things that I can think of off the top of my head were when the three girls meet each other for the first time. Lexia comes running up to Yuya's place with Luna and Owen, and as they kind of quote-unquote greet each other, it's kind of funny that they question why Kaori's there. So, when Lexia shows up, she, yells at Yuya, and she's like, "Hi, who's the girl?" And then it goes over to Luna, and she's like, "We could use some help over here. Also, who's the girl?" And then it pans over to Owen, and he's like, "Please, Sir Yuya, we need assistance. Also, who's the girl?" And I didn't know how to write that. But that one was really good. That was one of my favorite parts. Also, when he does the lightning infusion on the spear, and the book describes him as swinging it around, just like practicing. And the book describes there being a trail of lightning behind the spear. So I'm imagining when a lightsaber gets swung in Star Wars, it leaves that little trail behind it. And the fact that he's entertained by that puts a smile on my face too, because that sounds like something I would do. And then the third thing would probably just be that little teaser at the epilogue where there's the three demons in the wasteland, and one of them mentions, it's "Oh yeah, we were totally wiped out by a superhuman way back in the day, so now we have to do things in secret instead of just attacking places." I'm gonna just go ahead and assume that's the Sage. I can't imagine it not being the Sage that wiped out a good majority of the demons back in the day. Anyway, the next videos will be shorter. My notes were far too much. This video took forever to do. Thanks for stopping by and listening to my notes. I'll have new book notes ready. I need to buy new books too. Anyway, you guys have a good night.